Hello everyone and welcome to another Simplygon tutorial. Today we're going to show you how to reduce this humble pile of trash using the aggregation processor. We'll do this first in Maya and then demonstrate how you can complete this process entirely within Unreal using the Simplygon plugin. While we're using Maya in this tutorial, as ever we'd like to remind you that the Simplygon UI is pretty much universal across all the software that we support. So you should be able to follow along this step-by-step demonstration using your own supported application. Aggregation is a Simplygon optimization method used to transform a group of many objects with many materials into a single merged object with a single material. With this method you can keep the original UVs, meaning that areas sharing the same texture space can be preserved. This is important when merging kit-bashed object collections where there tend to be many objects sharing materials. Casting the materials for these kinds of object collections would lead to texture duplication, a blurrier texture at the same resolution. With aggregation, the texture space in the combined material will be more efficiently used, allowing us to view the merged object as closely as we would the original group of objects, while reducing the draw call cost. So this asset contains around 77,000 polygons and uses many individual materials. We're going to lower the poly count and material count by reducing and merging. First off, we're going to deal with the polygon count. Okay, let's create a simple cube. We'll use the top face of this cube as a ground plane. This is for clipping off the bottom of the group of objects, removing invisible polygons underneath. I'll scale up the cube and move it down so it's in the right place to create a floor. Now I'll create a selection set just for the cube. And I'll call it clipping, as the cube is being used to clip the bottom of the group of objects. Now I'll select the group of objects, choose Add LOD Component, then Basic, and then Aggregation with Material Baking. Okay, this opens our setting panel. Under Aggregation Pipeline in the Aggregation Settings drop-down, we will select Merge Geometries. This merges all objects into one geometry. We will also turn on Geometry Culling. Geometry Culling removes internal invisible geometry, cutting down on needless polygon count. The Geometry Culling Precision slider lets us set exactly how accurately geometry is culled from 0 to 1. A higher number yields more precise results but will increase the processing time. We'll leave this at the default of 0.5 for now. Under Geometry Culling Settings, we can tell Simplygon to use the group we created to clip the geometry. So tick the box and choose Clipping from the drop-down menu, as this is what we named the group containing our floor cube. Because we're baking a single material for everything in the object, output material settings are important. Every texture here will be contained within the material size you select when the materials are baked down. As a result, we'll choose 2048 by 2048, also known as a 2K texture, to maintain a good amount of detail. Finally, we will select which maps we need for this aggregated object. We only need color, normal, and specular for this object. But wait. If we look at the bike over here, this single asset does use transparency. Now if we'd been hasty and processed it now, we'd have lost the transparency needed to display that wheel correctly. So our solution here is to remove objects that require transparency and process them separately. This is so we don't create needless transparency maps for objects that don't require them. So I'll move the bike out of the main group. Now I reselect our main group and I process it. And here is our aggregated object minus the bike, and around 30,000 polygons lighter. We can see by looking underneath that a lot of the internal geometry has now disappeared and the base is clipped. If we look closely, we can see that the textures still look good too. Also, if we go over to the UV layout, we can see that the UVs are nicely laid out with no duplication of texture space. Okay, now the asset is ready to move over to Unreal. Let's go. Time to import this into Unreal. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with importing assets into Unreal, but we'll cover it here quickly just in case. I drag my FBX into the content browser and I'll make sure that Create New Material is selected and click Import. Unreal will automatically detect the exported textures and make a new material for me. As we see, everything looks great and looks as we expected. I can now place this in the scene as one merged asset. Great, now let's quickly cover how we could do all of that without having to leave the Unreal Engine. So right here I've got my pile of trash. Don't ask too many questions, but we have one. As you can see, it's made up of many different objects. We really chucked as many objects as we could at it to provide a good example of when aggregation would be useful. Firstly, I'm going to click the Simplygon plugin icon at the top and click Clipping Planes. Now if I search for clipping plane in the world outliner, you can see that Simplygon has created a handy clipping plane gizmo for me. In the details panel, if I click add, it has now added one clipping plane. I can move this up and down or side to side, and this will be used as our clipping plane. It's quite far away from our trash heap, so I'm just going to slide it over here and then lower it. So that is just below the ground. Good, job done. Now on to reducing the asset. If you go to Window and then click Stand in Outliner, a new window will pop up. If I select all the assets in the trash heap and then click Create, we're essentially adding all these assets ready for processing. As you can see, it says Not Built, so we still have some work left to do. Click on the Stand-in Mesh and then go over to the Settings. We're going to set the pipeline to Near, which is for aggregation. The Far processor is for remeshing, which is for reducing assets for viewing at a distance. We want this asset to be viewed relatively close up, so we'll be using Near. If we then open the Aggregation Settings, we're going to see again the same options available to us that we had in Maya. The Geometry Culling option that we had previously is right here, so we're going to enable that and we'll leave the precision at 0.5 like before. Next, over to the Geometry Culling settings themselves, we'll want to check Use Clipping Planes. This means that the processor will now use the clipping plane that we've just set up. Finally, in the Mapping Image settings, we can adjust the output texture size as before. I'm going to set this to 2K, which is 2048 by 2048. And then finally at the bottom, make sure you add the materials you wish to cast. I'm going to cast base color, normal and roughness. Great, that should be everything. To start the processor, click Build. And there we go, it's done. Simplygon has automatically swapped out the group of meshes for our reduced mesh, and as you can see, it's looking really good and obviously much more performant. If I double click the material and view the texture, you can see that it is indeed all baked down into one atlas, and we didn't even have to leave Unreal. If you want to change any settings, you can just go back to the stand-in outliner, adjust some settings and click Rebuild. Or if you want your old group of meshes back, just right-click on the stand-in and click Remove. It's as easy as that. We hope you've enjoyed this aggregation tutorial converting many objects and materials into a single, easy-to-handle object with one group of textures. For more information about our suite of tools and documentation, head to simplygon.com. Remember to hit the subscribe button and follow our social media channels to stay up to date with the latest news and tutorials from Simplygon.